I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for August the 28th, 2023, 29th in the West Pacific. As I always state at the beginning of these videos, the thoughts expressed here are just mine, and if you're going to be making any decisions out of any of the tropical cyclones that I'm going to be talking about today, make sure that you look towards your local weather office and local emergency management. I give a big picture of things here. I can't get down to the local level for your neighborhood. They can. I'm just here to, again, give my big picture thoughts on what's going on within the environment around all these storms. So we're going to start off with Idalia. We're going to start in the Atlantic, go through the Atlantic systems, and then we're going to go over to the West Pacific as we have two more systems over there. Now, in the Atlantic, unfortunately, here we are, another year in a row where we've had a significant threat in the Gulf of Mexico, and this is looking to be yet another one of those big major hurricanes coming into the Gulf Coast. Now, this is Idalia here in the Western Caribbean, and it has been a couple of days since my last video, and I apologize for that. I was not able to make them this weekend, but remember we talked about a couple days ago that models had expected the system to stall over the Yucatan Peninsula and come off, today, then develop in the Gulf of Mexico as it came offshore. Unfortunately, what we saw on Saturday was the disturbance stayed much more east of where models had anticipated, and we actually had a tropical depression form on Saturday. That's about 2 days, earlier than models had anticipated. Now, here we are. If you compare runs to a couple of days ago to today, we have a near hurricane where models a couple days ago were only wanting it to form in the southern Gulf of Mexico, and we're probably going to have a hurricane coming into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, in terms of immediate impacts, Western Cuba is right now being impacted by this. There's a hurricane warning in place, and we are likely to see some significant surge of 4 to 6 feet along the western coast as the system comes through. It might not be landfall, but you're already in it. And you can see all that convection lifting northward as the storm begins to lift northward. There's an upper trough over the Gulf that is starting to lift it up, and this will carry it northward and get it to go towards Florida. Now, the system has been limited a little bit today. Last night we saw some intensification up to 65 miles per hour, but since then we haven't seen much intensification. Now, we do have a recon plane flying in from South Florida. After this video, they'll get in and they'll get us to current data, and we'll see if it has intensified some, maybe gotten to a hurricane. But this system has been limited. It only intensified about 5 miles per hour from recon data earlier today from last night. And the main limiting factors right now is some wind shear impacting the system. You can see some of the cloud elements here on the northwestern side. They are being pushed towards the center of circulation, which the center of circulation is on the northwestern side of this convection, is confirmed by radar. And alongside that, this convection is not really organizing into an eye wall. We're not really seeing on radar, at least, and I didn't pull radar. I should have done that, but I didn't. But on radar, we're not seeing bands form around the eye. We're not seeing, the typical curved band structures that will eventually lead to an eye wall. Now, that's eventually going to happen in all likelihood here. We're going to be getting to a point in the Gulf of Mexico tomorrow where the environmental conditions are going to be much more favorable. And unfortunately, we are looking at a likelihood of rapid intensification on approach to landfall. Now, I'm going to show you the HAPS model. This is one of the high-resolution hurricane models. It's one of the ones that became operational this year. Now, the HAPS, I know a lot of you probably saw runs a couple days ago on the HAPS models of a big major hurricane coming into Florida. The thing to watch for this weekend was to see after recon data got in, which we had a lot of recon data coming in yesterday and we're getting more today. If these models had stayed consistent on the runs like that, then we should pay more attention to their runs, as they do tend to do much better with recon data naturally, as I can get us actual observations and rather more of a guess of what may be happening in the atmosphere. Unfortunately, with the recon data, we have seen an uptick in the global models, such as the GFS, and we have seen a continuation. Lots of consistency, unfortunately, between all of the hurricane models that this system will likely become a powerful major hurricane on approach to landfall. I'm going to show you that here. Now, pay attention to the structure as we go through. This is a simulated radar loop, and you can see The general structure that I described, with not really much convection on the northwestern side because of that shear, but lots of convection on the southeastern side that will eventually be, completely kept to the side for the most part as it comes through Cuba. Now you can see as we go through, we don't really see much development of an eye wall on the model here. And you can see all the heavy rainfall here. This would cause still a significant wind event of hurricane force winds being possible here. In fact, they're expected. A significant storm surge event and a lot of heavy rainfall, especially in some of the higher mountainous terrain in western Cuba. That could be a significant storm there for Cuba. As we get into the Gulf of Mexico, we start to see an inner eye wall develop. You see these banding features forming around the eye, and eventually on the model, we do get a formed eye wall, and at that point, we do start to see significant rapid intensification on approach to landfall. And right now, that landfall is probably going to be Wednesday morning, local time. And you can see that here, a very powerful major hurricane here approaching the Big Bend region of Florida. Here's the environment. This is a 200 millibar flow map from the same model. Here's this upper trough that's starting to lift it northwards. We have some shear from an upper ridge over the Bay of Campeche, but that will continue to weaken. And you can see by the time we get here into tomorrow, we'll have this upper trough developing over the western Gulf of Mexico. So weakened shear as the upper level flow is going to be more in line with the actual steering flow. And alongside that, notice the increased divergence aloft. In fact, we're looking at potentially a jet streak impact. Like I've talked about jet streaks several times in these videos over the past year. And those can really favor rapid intensification. And you can see that take shape there. And we may see a phase of very significant rapid intensification here in final approach to landfall. It may be the case where we have a Cat 2, west of Port Charlotte, and then, Category 3, maybe Category 4 coming into the Big Bend region of Florida. Alongside the atmospherics, the seasonal temperatures are very warm. The Gulf of Mexico is much warmer than average. And a lot of this water is not just warm at the surface. They are pretty warm with depth. Now that does decrease, the oceanic heat content does decrease as you get towards the coastline because this coastline is naturally shallow, which unfortunately makes it very susceptible to a significant storm surge event if a hurricane comes through here. So, while the waters do get, more shallow there, it doesn't mean that the storm is going to weaken though, as that storm will probably be moving quick enough to negate any of those impacts of the shallower water. Alongside that, the atmospherics are not going to change. The atmospherics are only going to get more favorable as the system goes through the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Now here is the National Hurricane Center forecast cone, and this is their 5 p.m. advisory, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and you can see all the watches and warnings in place. A tropical storm warning in effect for the northeastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. Hurricane warning in place for western Cuba, as this is probably going to be very close, if not make it to hurricane intensity, right before coming into, right into western Cuba. And for Florida, you can see a lot of warnings here. Hurricane warnings from Apalachicola down through Tampa, with a hurricane watch down towards Port Charlotte, a tropical storm warning going down southeast of Naples, with the tropical storm watch and warning in effect as well for portions of the Florida Keys. And you can also see tropical storm watches now from, say, just north of Fort Lauderdale, all the way up through the coastline of Jacksonville, Savannah, and up north of Charleston in South Carolina. We do have storm surge watches as well in this portion of coastline. I can show you that here. This is the storm surge watch and warning map. You can see the storm surge warning in place now from Apalachicola down just north of Port Charlotte, with a storm surge watch from around Port Charlotte down to the southeast of Naples, and that storm surge watch in effect north of Jacksonville all the way up north of Charleston. And I think you get up towards Hilton Head, or sorry, no, not Hilton Head. Myrtle Beach is not in the storm surge watch, but they're just southwest of there, where the storm surge watch goes to. And as for actual storm surge values, you can see, I'm trying to find all my graphics here. The storm surge values are very significant here, 8 to 12 feet in the Big Bend region of Florida. But notice it's not just kept to the Big Bend. Notice along this entire coastline of the peninsula of Florida, we're talking about very significant storm surge of 2+ feet, and in a lot of cases, 3+ feet. Now, the exact track into the coastline will make an impact on exactly who gets the maximum storm surge. You can see that the HAPS model has this coming in. I believe this is near Cedar Key in the Big Bend of Florida. This would put the maximum storm surge there. However, it is still possible that the system tracks maybe a little bit further down the coast. That could increase the overall storm surge impacts further south, including the Tampa Bay area. If it comes in a little bit further up the coast, we could be talking about maximized storm surge values still in Cedar Key, but also increase it around Apalachicola and areas east. And those little wobbles in the track are not really going to be able to be fully described in the forecast track. Those are, wobbles that we're probably never going to be able to fully tell you ahead of any hurricane, no matter how much research we do, just because of those wobbles being so unpredictable. But regardless of the track, we're talking about a very significant hurricane for this region. I looked back at her historical stuff. The last time we had a major hurricane that I could find come into the Big Bend of Florida was back in 1950, Hurricane Easy. So it's been 73 years now since a major hurricane has come through. And the last significant storm surge event was back in the 1990s from, I believe it was the perfect storm back in 1991. So, this is a very significant storm for the coastline. And it's very, very important for those along the coastline. You need to get your preparations done tonight, especially. You might have tomorrow to get it done. You cannot be waiting around on this. And if you are issued into an evacuation order, I know we've already had some mandatory evacuation orders issued along some of the coastlines. You need to heed that. Storm surge is not something you want to play around with. 12 feet of water, that's a lot of water. And the power of water is extreme. And you should never underestimate it. Storm surge is one of the main fatality-causing impacts in tropical cyclones. We just want to avoid anyone losing their life just because they might have underestimated the power of storm surge. You can survive wind, you cannot survive the water, unfortunately. Now, in terms of when that wind does arrive, here's the National Hurricane Center graphic. You can see in Cuba, it's already there. In the Florida Keys, tonight into early tomorrow is when tropical storm force winds will arrive. You don't have the greatest odds, but you do have still some significant odds, especially as you go further west. You can see about 30 to 40% there on the westernmost Keys. And if you get into Tampa, Port Charlotte, Tuesday morning to Tuesday afternoon, and the Big Bend of Florida, Tuesday night. So really, in the Big Bend of Florida, you need to have your preparations done by tonight or tomorrow, like I said. Do not wait around on this. I'd recommend getting your preparations done now, tonight, and heeding any evacuation orders that are issued tomorrow, and just getting out so you're not stuck in traffic as a hurricane comes through. Now, notably, as I said with the watches and warnings, this is not a Florida issue. This is not primarily a Florida issue. This system will be coming up into the southeastern coast, and you can see very significant odds here of tropical storm force winds along the coastline of Georgia and South Carolina, with the arrival time there being Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So in Georgia, you need to have your preparations done by tomorrow afternoon. South Carolina, have your preparations done by Wednesday morning. And along the outer banks of North Carolina, chances aren't too high right now. There is some uncertainty on exactly how the storm will track, but there are still some potential there for tropical storm force winds to come your way, and some preparations might be needed there. Just monitor the situation as it comes through. Now, that's all that I've got for Idalia. I know that was a lot, but this storm is just a lot. And that's the wrong storm. I meant to go to Franklin here over the Atlantic. As I said, we're going through the Atlantic systems, and we're going to the Western Pacific after. This is Hurricane Franklin. A very, very impressive hurricane. Fortunately, the storm is not peaking as it's going right towards Bermuda. It will be weakening as it does so, as shear starts to increase and sea surface temperatures start to decrease. But you can see an amazing structure here with a very clear eye. There's with the ocean surface very visible down below. The initial intensity is about 145 miles per hour from the National Hurricane Center. Dvorak estimates are being a little bit restricted now because of the lower tropopause over the region. We'll have a recon plane going in later this evening, so we'll see exactly what the intensity is. But I mean, regardless, 100, 45 miles per hour, 150, 155. This is a powerful hurricane and one that is really impressive to see, especially in an El Nino year like we are in today. Now, this is the microwave pass from earlier this afternoon, and we have seen some signs that there might be a cap to its intensification still. We had the strong eye wall, of course, but we also had strong banding forming on the outside, and it's possible that over time this leads to a secondary eye wall and leads to an eye wall replacement cycle. Now, from what I can see on satellite, we aren't really seeing too many indications of that taking shape. I can look at infrared. I mean, we can see some of the cloud tops warming, but there's no real indication of the eye starting to get more wobbly, which is some indication of an eye wall replacement cycle. And the general CDO, the central dense overcast of all the convection surrounding the eye, still looks pretty symmetric overall. So I don't think an eye wall replacement cycle is taking shape yet. Now, we have had a couple of days that were interesting with modeling in terms of track to Bermuda, mainly because of this trough here over the northeastern United States. There's been a lot of flipping and flopping around with the models on timing with this trough, and fortunately, the trends have been today that we are not expecting the system to make a direct hit on Bermuda, like we had forecast last week. The modeling had showed that if this was a bit quicker, it could have made a recurve a little bit earlier and gotten very close to the island, and that is still a possibility. It could still absolutely get a little close, uncomfortably close at that to the island, but you can see here's the National Hurricane Center forecast cone showing the track here remaining generally north of the island. Now, regardless of track, even if it stays far north like this, the tropical storm force wind foot is going to be increasing as it gains latitude, and that's why we have a tropical storm watch here in Bermuda. And I'd imagine this will be upgraded to a tropical storm warning later tonight. And that will also bring some significant surf impacts as it tracks north, not only to Bermuda, but also to Atlantic Canada and the eastern United States. Now, we're going to move, quickly mention for Bermuda, impacts for tropical storm force winds are likely to begin tomorrow evening, and you can see Bermuda here in the, I believe that's 50 to 60% range of tropical storm force winds. That is the discussion. I meant to go to, yes, Typhoon Saola. I've got everything a little bit disorganized here. I apologize for that. You can see Typhoon Saola here now on its northwestward track east of Luzon, and the system has come a little bit further south than models had anticipated. Remember, a couple days ago, we talked about how the system was forecast to make a loop, and the question was exactly how far east or west would the storm get on that loop. If it was further west, we would have gotten a solution like we have now. If it was further east, we would have gotten a storm coming up towards Taiwan. The system has come a little bit further west on that turn than originally forecast, and you can see here the significant thunderstorm activity going on around the eye as it really nears the coastline of Luzon. Now, we're not expecting a landfall in this part of Luzon, but throughout the Luzon Straits, the system is likely to pass through. Current intensity is about 100 knots by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and I generally agree with that intensity estimate, as the system has gone through an eye wall replacement cycle, and you can see that here. It's in the middle of one, at least from this microwave pass, with this eye wall being eroded. It's about half an eye wall now, and this larger band here, this larger secondary eye wall formed around it. And eventually this inner eye wall will die out, and this inner eye wall will contract, and that will at some point become the new eye wall. Now, this is still a significant storm as it comes northwest, and we are still expecting significant impacts here. I believe we have signal 3 warnings in place from Pagasa, and I'll update this so we actually get the latest forecast cone. It might take a little bit to, there we go, update. And you can see that general track through the Luzon Straits. Now, in terms of Taiwan, we're not expecting the chances of a landfall have come down, so we're not really expecting that anymore. But keep in mind, you don't need this system to come ashore. Think of Doksuri last month, where we had, the storm stay south, and you had significant wind and rain impacts. That's going to be similar here with Saola here, and you can see that general track here keeping it south, but on all the onshore flow into the mountainous terrain will keep it, putting a lot of heavy rain into the high topography. Now, in terms of track, the system is forecast to track into the South China Sea, and there has been a bit of uncertainty in exactly if the system is actually going to make landfall over the next 5 days in China. Reason being, we have this upper trough, or sorry, not this upper trough, this upper ridge here developing, and this is going to try and nudge the system offshore. It's going to try and parallel the coastline of China. So on the model, we actually don't get the system coming ashore for quite a while. Now, the system is forecast to weaken a little bit. As it comes through here, it likely will have to deal with some drier air from the hard topography from Taiwan. That's good news for China, but we are still expecting a typhoon to come through here, and it may get very close here to China. So you need to stay tuned to the local weather office there. I'll leave, with all the storms today, I'll leave links to local weather offices and RSMC Hurricane and Typhoon Centers, that being the National Hurricane Center in the Atlantic, Japan Meteorological Agency in the Western Pacific. Now, we've got one last system to talk about today, and this is a tropical storm. I'm going to try and look up the name here because I learned how to say it, but I forgot. HaiKui. I think it's HaiKui. If I messed that up, I apologize, but I'm learning the pronunciation of this name. But the system was named last night, and so far we are actually seeing some pretty good signs of development of this system. You can see we have a large curved band look coming into what appears to be the center of circulation here. And this is something that typically does preclude some intensification of tropical cyclones. We have seen on microwave that there was a strong band on the southern side. Let's see exactly if that wraps around on the inner core. Maybe we could see possibly an eye wall develop from the system. But this system is forecast to track northwest under the influence of the subtropical ridge here. And this system will be a significant threat to the southern Japanese islands and Taiwan. Yes, yet again. Now, here is the forecast track from the Japan Meteorological Agency, or sorry, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and you can see becoming a significant typhoon on approach to the southern Japanese islands and Taiwan. I wish I could give better news here, but unfortunately, even after all the storms we've had, here we are with two more systems of Saola and HaiKui coming into southern Japan. And you can see, if we look at the 200 millibar flow, this is actually 250 millibar, you can see the general favorable environment. There might be a little bit of shear from this upper ridge north of the system, but as it gets towards the Japanese islands and Taiwan, the environment gets more favorable with fairly light shear as the vector of this steering ridge becomes more in line with a low level flow, and by then models do show more significant intensification here. Now, exactly where the system tracks in the southern Japanese islands and Taiwan, not sure. There's a lot of uncertainty there naturally with a 5-day forecast. Again, for those in Japan and Taiwan, stay tuned to your local weather office and the Japan Meteorological Agency, as this is yet again another significant typhoon coming your way. That was a lot today, I know, and I apologize for being a little bit disorganized today. I'll have it more organized tomorrow when I make my next video. Stay safe in every region of land that's going to be impacted by any tropical cyclone later this week. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.